The Game Awards 2024 have shown us a couple of trailers for new games. Amongst other things, also the trailer for The Witcher 4, which will have Ciri as the main protagonist. And while the majority of the fanbase was absolutely happy about this, there were also people who have raised some concerns and have seen a couple of red flags already in the trailer popping up. And I will be honest, I have to address those because I'm also very concerned, especially this year after seeing how other franchises, beloved IPs, have, let's say, gone down the drain because of how the devs treated the story and the franchise. And I would like to hear your opinion in the comment section below. Thank you very much already in advance. Let me address why I am so concerned first and foremost. If you look at my channel, you will see that I have a description which says that I'm a fan of Mass Effect, Dragon Age, The Witcher, and some other IPs, Horizon, for example, the Horizon games also. And especially this year, something happened to basically all of these franchises where I say they are just going down the drain. And I am unhappy about that. So my concerns or my criticism stems not from the need to necessarily bash or criticize everything, but because I do love these franchises for many, many years. I have been playing the games in all those franchises since day one, since they came out. And especially for Witcher, I have been reading the books when they came out in the 90s, when they were translated into the Czech language, and I had them at my disposal. And this was honestly the first big series or franchise in a fantasy setting that I really fell in love with. And I absolutely love the books. I love how they are written. I love the story. I like that it's this kind of, let's say, dark, gritty universe that is very mature and realistic. And the choices which Geralt makes in the books and also the other characters are often showing you that nothing is black and white. It is also something that people loved on the games that CDPR created then, and this is also the reason why the first game was actually so successful that they became the studio that we know now, that they were sticking to this original feeling, atmosphere, lore. They were using everything from the books in a manner where they didn't twist the original canon or the lore in any big way. They didn't change, for example, the history of what was written in the books. They didn't really change anything that was related to Geralt as a Witcher or in regards to his relationship with Ciri, for example. We need to keep in mind, though, that both the books as well as the first two CDPR games were focused on Geralt first and foremost. And yes, there are critical voices now who will say that the books were focused on Ciri, and I would disagree with it simply by starting to saying the books were called The Witcher. They are about Geralt. Yes, Ciri is an integral part of his life, but for me the books are first and foremost, as I said, about Geralt. And this is what also Sapkowski had in mind when he created the first stories and when he submitted them to Fantastica, now called Nova Fantastica, where they appeared for the first time. He was focused on Geralt and Geralt's path, and he was focused on the Witchers and using the world and the other characters as a vessel that is basically there for the main character to proceed throughout his story. Of course, I do acknowledge that Ciri is very, very important, but I do disagree with the part where people are saying that she is the main protagonist already in the books. She's not. The appearance of Ciri in the third game was a very welcome addition to the entire story. People were thrilled having her there. They were able to play partially as her, and that was a great addition from the game devs, and I completely agree that this was awesome. But this is also the game where some of the stuff already started to go quite away from the original canon. And I will be honest, there are a few things in this game which already did irk me. For example, Avala suddenly being very friendly, let's say, to Ciri. Yes, it was explained in a good manner, but it still was like a little back thought in my mind that this is really not consistent with how he was described in the books, or how in general the NL are described in the books. But because the main devs managed to incorporate in the story very well a reasoning why the sudden change of heart, it made more sense and it was, let's say, more acceptable, even though you still realized it is already a deviation from the lore. For me, the books are canon. Whatever happens after those books and is not originally written by Sapkowski, I do consider fanon. I'm not saying it's bad, of course not, because the games were really great, otherwise they wouldn't be so successful. But we have to keep in mind that it is fanon. It is not the original canon. You can still build on the original canon, you can expand on it, but it will never become canon unless it's written by the original author. And that is my state of mind when I'm looking at the games, when I'm looking at what's going on outside of the games and maybe in some other mediums. This is something that I really keep in mind. And again, I might be uptight with this view and people might not like it, but I keep on saying the original author is Sapkowski. He's written books where he outlined his world in the way that he wanted, and he as the original author has, let's say, the only say in what is canon and what is not canon. And I think he expressed quite clearly that he does not think the games are in any way, shape or form canon. He also considers his books to be canon. So this is my starting point. Now, Ciri did have an ending already in the books. We know that she basically traveled to a different world. She ended up in a world where you have King Arthur and where you have Sir Galahad. So basically he kind of connected the events from his books with the old British mythology and have indicated clearly by the end of those books that she remained there. She was talking to Sir Galahad by the end of Lady of the Lake and explaining to him what happened to her, what happened to Geralt and to Yennefer. And when she was doing that, she was crying. And it would indicate, the way how she told the story, that Geralt and Yennefer are probably dead, and that she didn't really see any reason anymore to remain in that world, in Sapkowski's original world or on the continent. And that's why she traveled away and stayed on a different world. So that is where the books are ending in terms of Ciri. Now, of course, CDPR, if they wanted to create, let's say, new games, they had to do some changes to the lore, and they had to explain in their own way what could have happened to Ciri, for example, or Geralt or Yennefer, in order to have them in the game. So I do understand that there are some deviations from the canon already there, otherwise we wouldn't have what we have in the games these days. The point is that they did it in a manner which, let's say, made sense, and which was not completely lore-breaking, which was just a deviation in order to start, let's say, a different timeline, and within that different timeline, tell a new story. And in that case, it made sense, although, again, I still do have problems with some of the changes they did, especially in The Witcher 3. Now, don't get me wrong, I still think The Witcher 3 is one of the best games I've ever played. It is fantastic, it's really well done, whether it's from the storytelling point of view, the writing point of view, the environments, the characters, everything just fits. And it was really awesome to play the game for the first time, as it was the 5th or 6th or 7th time. So it's always great to go back to that game. Now, no matter what changes CDPR did in their games, they were always trying to at least maintain that soul of the original story told by Sapkowski. So if you look, for example, at the ending where Ciri becomes a witcher, it was not an ending that everyone was choosing, just like not everyone was choosing the ending where she was the empress. But it made sense in terms of how the books went, for example. So she was really at Kaer Morhen. She was trained there. But that was at the point when she was a child still. It was after the destruction of Sintra, where Geralt took care of her. He took the responsibility for his child of destiny and took her to Kaer Morhen because that was the only thing that he knew as a home. And she was trained there simply because that was the mindset of the Witchers. They didn't know any other way how to raise a child. They have only always dealt with Witcher boys. So what they did was give her the, let's say, education from the books that they had, which was, yes, about ghouls and outghouls and stuff like that. But they did try to raise her in their own way. And as far as I remember, Geralt also said that he was training her because a little bit of like physical movement and exercise will do her some good and will do some good to any child. So basically that was the reason why she was there and why she was training. But once there was also Triss, she realized that Ciri is having some kind of additional abilities, something big, something that she wasn't even sure that she can get under control. And that was the point when they called Yennefer, and Yennefer basically tried to train Ciri in magic, in terms of magic. But at that time, it was very clear that they will not continue, let's say, to make a Witcher out of Ciri. They were just doing this because they were trying to, let's say, raise her the best way they could. But it was already at that time when they realized there is something more to Ciri and that Ciri has something extra, something unique. So what CDPR did here was pick a spot from the books that actually is, let's say, canon, because this was in the books. It was in the books that she was training like a Witcher and she was at Kaer Morhen. So they picked this little moment and they built on it in the games, disregarding then basically what happened in the books later on. But that's the point. What I'm trying to say is that they actually made the effort to at least be coherent with certain portions of the canon so that the players who were also reading the books do recognize this setup, let's say, okay? And they do realize why this ending is basically a possible ending in the game. For me, that ending is non-canon just as much as all the other endings. For example, where Ciri becomes an empress. Again, this is simply because they picked a small portion of the book and they built on that. But it's not how it ended in the book. While Emhyr is really her father, I think only Geralt and Yennefer did realize that because they remembered him marrying Ciri's mother, Pavetta. The problem was that once everybody knew who Ciri is, that she is basically the one that's supposed to bear the child who will save the world based on Itlin's prophecy, he tried to get his hands on her as well, but in a manner that probably many people will find off-putting, and that is he wanted to marry her himself. So yeah, that's not exactly the greatest thing. And of course, Ciri did want to avoid that. So if we look at the books, what happened after these two spots in the books that the CDPR devs picked for their Witcher 3 endings, in reality, what happened in the books, it was Emhyr's people who were chasing Ciri. It was the NL who was chasing Ciri. It was all sorts of other people who were chasing her as well, because basically there was a bounty on her. And everybody tried to get their hands on her because they wanted to bring her back to Emhyr and be paid. Or if the NL would get their hands on her, they would no longer let her go. She was chased left and right. So if we look at the endings from The Witcher 3 through this lens, they are really not canon, considering that if Ciri would become a Witcher, she would be so recognizable and everybody who would be seeing her would be knowing that she is the one that somebody's looking for, namely Emhyr's people, for example, or the bounty hunters, and she would be basically chased off everywhere, so she wouldn't really be able to work as a Witcher, because people would realize that instead of paying her for her services, they can get actually money if they deliver her to Emhyr or to somebody who's chasing her and who's paying a bounty for her. So that ending is really not making sense to me in terms of the book canon. In regards of the ending with the Empress, Emir did marry in the books a false Ciri. So officially everybody thought that he's married to Ciri. And there was a girl that was supposed to be Ciri. So how would you explain then when the real Ciri would pop up, you know? So there was a problem with that as well. Now, if she would become an Empress, she would not become an Empress because she was his daughter. He would definitely want to marry her or at least have a child with her. That was what he really wanted. That was his ultimate goal. Again, why would Ciri want to do that? Why would she want to go there? She expressed many times during the books the opinion that she's not really fond of children and that she doesn't want to have any children. So that would also go against the canon. So while I understand that the endings in The Witcher 3 are consistent with what was presented in that game, it is still very far away from the original canon. It builds on it, but it's not what really happened in the books, and it's very far away from what is the reality in the canon. Of course, the unfortunate third ending with Ciri dying or Ciri disappearing is something different, but in terms of the possible choices that were there in the third game, they all made a certain sense from a book canon point of view. So that's why people were still able, let's say, to accept them, even if they were fans of the original books and they didn't like the deviations that were spread throughout the games. So if I look back at the first 3 games or the original trilogy from The Witcher, no matter what ending you have chosen for Geralt and for Ciri and for the state of the world, you had an enclosed story, I would say. So the original trilogy ended with that third game for me, whether it was Ciri as an Empress, Ciri as a Witcher, or Ciri not returning back to Geralt and presumably being dead. It was a self-contained story that ended with the third game. And I believe the game devs were at that point already having a very established universe, which was built vastly on the original books from Sapkowski. And with a little bit of the deviations that they did, they were still able to keep up the, let's say, original major points from the lore. Now, Ciri becoming a Witcher was not meant in a physical way. It was understood always by the end of The Witcher 3 as in terms of her deciding not to continue, let's say, as the Lady of Space and Time and using her magical abilities anymore to escape the Wild Hunt, because the Wild Hunt was basically beaten at that point. Plus, she had also already dealt with the White Frost. And she had to choose a path which she wants to follow, whether it's, let's say, the Empress, whether it's the Witcher ending, or something completely different. As I mentioned before, she did choose in the original books to travel to a different world and stay there. Now, in this trilogy, she chose one of the 3 endings, and that's how it ended. Most of the players have done their choices and were happy with their state of the world as they left it. The problem I have with any game devs or any IP franchise, whatever you want to call it, is if you are having previous games and then you say that you want to create a completely new trilogy or you want to create a completely new game, and then you actually do one thing, you canonize one of the endings, and that basically means you took only one portion of your fan base, canonized their endings, and disregarded completely the options or the decisions of the other portions of your fan base. And that's never going to work well with an established fan base, because people will not be happy if you do that. And the universe that they have at their fingertips, as I said, is so vast that if they wanted to create a new trilogy, they could have used so many other things. And instead, what I'm hearing and what the discussion is and what is also written in some of the articles is where the game devs are saying, well, yeah, but Geralt is basically retired. We didn't really want to go ahead with him anymore. So logically, it should have been Ciri. It is completely uncreative state of mind where you don't even consider other options. And that's what's so baffling to me. You have a universe where you have portions of the world that, for example, Sapkowski only mentioned briefly in passing by, where you could have completely created a new game in a new setting with a new protagonist. You could technically create completely new history because you could have simply placed the game in an area that is not having any history in Sapkowski's books. So you could have basically created your own canon and your own lore, which would have nothing to do with the books, but it would still not be at least lore breaking with the original canon. And you would even still be able to incorporate Ciri there because she is the Lady of Space and Time. So you could have done that. Now, to the people pointing out that she might have lost her abilities when she stopped the White Frost, do you realize that the Elder Blood is just an expression in the books because the elves, and specifically Itlin in her prophecy, was not using at the time the words DNA or genetics? Do you realize that it's not actual blood that is something that gives her the abilities that she has? It's her genetics, it's her genes. So if she would want to stop the White Frost with her genes, it would have to completely destroy her on a genetical level in order for her to lose these abilities, which is absolute nonsense. In that case, the character is dead. And this misunderstanding that the people have is actually easily explained in the books when you are reading those passages where she is with the NL. They do explain to her that they need her, or respectively her child. At the time, they believe her child is the perfect person to open the gates to new worlds. And that is basically what they are considering the salvation from the White Frost. They want to escape it through the gates that she, or respectively they believe her child, can open to other worlds. It has something to do with her strength in magic, with her unusual, unique abilities, not necessarily something that she does with her genes. Her genes are only responsible for inheriting these unique, special abilities. So for me, it is not making sense to completely disregard her abilities. And again, going back, in that case also, you could have still used her in the next few games as an additional character, again, that pops in just like she did in the third game, where she became a very important character, but she could have still be there no matter what setting you would choose, no matter what time you would choose, no matter what new protagonist you would choose. So that's not the point of not having Ciri in the game. She could have been whatever you have chosen. But making her a witcher in terms of becoming physically a witcher is absolutely lore-breaking. And that is so much deviating from the original lore that it can no longer be overlooked. As long as you've made the original 3 games, we have noticed the deviations, but they were explained well, they were understandable, and they were consistent with what the ending of those games was. But the problem is that here you already have a start of a new trilogy that is based on breaking the lore. So of course it's not perceived very well, at least not by a portion of the fan base. I have mentioned, for example, in my posts or in my thoughts that I have shared online, for example, with the new game, you could have created a new Witcher, whether it would be a customizable main protagonist or it would be a predefined character. It doesn't really matter, but you could have made simply a Witcher, which would be consistent with the lore. So yes, we are talking about a male Witcher. You could have set the game, as I said, either in the past or, for example, on the border between Hakland and Zerikania, and then you could have made up whatever you want as a history, as the canon and lore, NPCs, accompanying characters, whatever you like. You had vast options there, which I believe are now technically wasted. wasted with making Ciri a new protagonist because you are going the cheap and easy route. It is much easier, of course, for somebody who's not very creative to use the same characters, the same setting. And basically, from what we have seen in the trailer, Ciri behaved and talked and acted like Geralt 2.0. Basically, it was Geralt just in Ciri's skin. And that's not something that was very likable to me. Ciri has been always a separate character, a person of her own. She had her own personality, she had her own skills, and also, as we have seen in the third game, her skills were not the same as the Witcher ones because she was able to use these skills as the Lady of Space and Time and teleport. So if you already wanted to make a game with Ciri as the main protagonist, why not use that as a new set of skills? Why not use the abilities that she has as Lady of Space and Time, that teleporting options, etc. But you had to make her a physical Witcher, and that's something where it's absolutely jarring to me to see. And I do not understand how they want to explain this in a concise manner that would not be absolutely lore-breaking to what Sapkowski was stating in his books. My reasoning is also based on one thing. Ciri is already a young adult when we leave the events of The Witcher 3, and she's smart enough to realize what huge potential she has, what kind of ability she has. She manages to master the skills of the teleporting. She is skipping and jumping between worlds and places, and has other skills and abilities that she can use that other people don't have. She has a very individual skill set, and that is also reflected in how she wants to use it. Now, why on earth would you, let's say, dump down Ciri, because that would be for me dumping her down, when she would decide suddenly that she doesn't want to use these extremely useful skills, something that is very, very unique and nobody else has, and why she would undergo the trial of the grasses and trade in these huge, unique, awesome abilities for standard Witcher abilities, something that basically any Witcher has. Why would she do that? Now, I'm not sure about the quality of the English translation of the original canon books by Sapkowski, but if you want to read a little bit more about, for example, the Trial of the Grasses and who can and cannot be a Witcher, I would suggest to read Sword of Destiny and Blood of Elves. There's mentions enough that give you a good idea of why making Ciri a Witcher is not making sense from a lore point of view, why for me it doesn't make sense from a Ciri character's point of view, because you are basically throwing away awesome unique abilities, and why it's also not possible for me simply in terms of genetics. She cannot simply, let's say, lose her abilities and still be alive, to put it that way. So in many ways, what we have seen in the trailer is indicating a huge breaking of the lore, a complete rewrite of the lore. And at this point, it's not something that is making me thrilled about the new game, I have to say. I am also disappointed in the studio as such. They were exhibiting a vast amount of creativity in the past original trilogy and in their past games. They were able to create wonderful worlds with awesome stories. And actually, on that spot where they deviated from the canon, they were able to write something that was making sense. What I am disappointed in is why they don't use these abilities going forward into a new trilogy. Of course, it would require more creativity, more work, and there is this risk of starting something new if they would do something like what I mentioned before, that they would start a completely new protagonist in a very different area or in a very different timeline. And they rather decided to do this cheap and easy option to just pick one of the already existing characters and just go ahead with that one. And I find it lazy writing and uncreative and uninspiring. And it has nothing to do with Ciri, okay? It doesn't matter if it would be Ciri or if you would take, I don't know, young Vesemir and going ahead with young Vesemir's experiences. I'm sure they are able to create a good game, but it's just no longer creative. It's no longer this sense of wonder to experience that game because there is nothing new, nothing creative in it. It's something we've already seen before. And instead of taking more inspiration from the books, where you really had, as I mentioned before, vast options of what you could have exploited, which was not very well described, but was already mentioned in the books and was something that made people curious about it. Instead of going back to that, they just further deviate now with their canon from the original canon and break the original canon in ways that many people find very jarring. We've got some additional information on what we have seen in the trailer in the meantime. So the monster is called Bauk from the Serbian mythology. Geralt was confirmed to be in the game. People are fearing what treatment he will get. And again, this is one of the additional questions which people are having where they are not sure what's going to really happen and where they see some potential for additional red flags, let me put it that way, where they are not sure if he will be there in the new game just to be killed off or if he will be serving the position of a mentor to Ciri, somebody to whom she regularly can come back and check in with him. So people are afraid of what will happen to Geralt. And that's not a good indicator for your new game if people are fearing of what is going to happen to a beloved character instead of looking forward happily that he will be there. And I think this is coming also simply from what I have mentioned at the very beginning. We have seen so many IPs, beloved franchises going down the drain and being completely destroyed, whether lore-wise, whether the original characters being completely destroyed or rewritten, that people are already having these fears when they see any AAA studio announce a new game and they do not know what to think. So people are starting to be very skeptical, especially after the last year or two, when we have seen what happened to other big IPs and franchises. And I think that fear is understandable. It's the same concern and skepticism that I am also having at this point. An additional point that adds to those fears and red flags, in my opinion, is also the mention of we want to aim for new players, which was in one of the released articles. And I'm again having a very strong Veilguard déjà vu here, and not in a good way. I understand that you want to draw in new players to your franchise, but I am just afraid if you are going to do it in a manner that will be completely disregarding the original old fan base. And when I look at the trailer and I look what they have done to Ciri in terms of breaking the lore, I am even more skeptical. This is an additional red flag for me. So to summarize it, I have some concerns here and quite big ones, to be honest. I was very hyped for the new game before they released any information. Let's not forget, it's just one trailer at this point. We haven't seen any gameplay, and that will be also an important and integral part of the reveals that will be going forward. What will be the gameplay be like? We have no hint of the overall story yet. We have no clue about that one. So I'm not sure if that will be any good, or if it will be bad, or if it will be awesome. We know nothing about it. But like I said, I'm very skeptical, and currently my interest is low due to everything we've seen and due to all these red flags. I will definitely continue to watch and update you all when there is something new. So if you would like more updates, or if you like my takes, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It would be really awesome and much appreciated. And if you would like to discuss the Witcher lore, I'm happy to do that either in the comment section, or you can also reach out to me on my X account over on X. But at this point, I would like to hear your thoughts, what you think about it. If you did perceive these red flags as well, and if you are also concerned based on what we have seen and heard so far, or if you are just thrilled about the new game as such, no matter who's the protagonist. Thank you very much for watching, stay tuned and game on!